Hello and welcome to Adapt with Danette FM. I'm Danette Fenton-Menzies. I'm an adaptability leader expert, also a speaker, an author and an executive coach. And I'd love to welcome into our conversation today Jez FM, and we're talking season 2, collaboration and problem solving. Welcome Jez, how are you today?
I'm good. It's nice and sunny here in Melbourne. It's actually 24 degrees at this current moment, so that's unheard of in Melbourne.
How good is that?
Probably be 6 degrees and raining in a minute, so that's exciting. No, I'm good. I'm the podcast producer here. I've done work in comedy and also writing comedy for TV, so I hope we bring a little bit of that today. But on top of that, Danette, a little bit more about you. You are the co-founder and director of learning at Magical Learning, which has been a training facilitation organization that's run for 25 years successfully. It's worked with massive brands like Westpac and the Australian government in Australia, as well as international brands, and has also partnered with international thought leaders like John Mattone and Robin Sharma. You've made courses with them. It's been amazing, and you've worked with them. So it's been really good to work with you and to continue working on this podcast. Today we're going to be talking to Ann Braithwaite, and we're going to be talking about unsolvable problems, collective intelligence, some really interesting concepts. But
yes.
Danette, before we get to any of that, we've got to start with our first segment, which is, of course, Adapt the News. Alrighty, this is Adapt the News. This is the segment where we look at a news story and Danette, you use your unique adaptable lens to break down some of the key elements. Now, this one is from the same website I actually used last week, which is goodnewsnetwork.org. I only just found this and I'm having a great time going through it.
Love it.
Highly recommend people go check it out. This article is by Andy Corbley, and it is old coal-fired power plant found the key to solving America's biggest clean energy challenge. Try saying that 10 times fast, everybody. So what this article is about is it's about, with renewables coming in, one of the big problems with setting up renewables is setting up the chain reaction after that. So it's not just setting up the solar panels, it's getting that energy from that solar panel, maybe via some sort of battery system to people. Setting up all those wires between each of those segments and building the infrastructure for that is typically one of the harder parts of setting up renewables, which is obviously any obstacle is going to make that harder. And now what they're realizing is they can utilize old coal-fired power plants as the almost power socket that you're plugging the renewables into, and you can just use that infrastructure. So, Danette, I wanted to get your thoughts on this as a sort of adaptability story.
I love this one, Jez. I particularly love it because if you look at a lot of the news that's in the news, it's often either or. So it's like, renewables or non-renewables. And it's sort of like they shouldn't ever talk to one another. And what I love about this is that the stakeholders have gone, you know what, some of these we're not using very much anymore or at all. How can we use them differently? And I love that they've not only gone, let's reuse them, let's reuse them with renewables. So we've got something that, for many years has brought value, now is being seen as, let's move more towards renewables. And rather than resisting that, they've gone, okay, I reckon we can use the best of both and create something that, we hadn't thought of before. So I love that the thinking around that, the problem solving, the collaboration, and the fact that there was no one in the background going, no, but. So instead they've gone, yes, and okay, let's work together and make this work. So I really love the fact that they're using something that, for a lot of people, they're gone, we're not going to use it so much anymore. And they've been able to go, well, how do we recycle or reuse this in a different way and continue to create really good outcomes? So great story, Jez. Loved it.
Yes, I love this as well. And I think it's also good for adaptable politicians of the future who may want to say that they were actually helping build out the infrastructure for clean energy projects via a coal project in the future, if they want to appeal to people that are more left-leaning. So good for them as well. But yes, I like it as well. It's such a good... With all these stories that we share, typically it's one thing utilizing a new feature and it's showing how they can adapt into the 2020s. So this has been a really good one. I like your insights about how it's taking two worlds and just combining them and going, let's just make energy one thing. So very cool.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for that Adapt the News segment, Danette. Let's jump over to our main course today, which is going to be your chat with Ann Braithwaite. Now, Ann Braithwaite is, of course, a friend of the show, not only having been on this podcast on this episode, but also on the Magical Learning podcast. Yes. But beyond that, Ann's also got a podcast that'll be coming out next year. That's going to be called Mission Possible, and I will be also producing that, so you can check that out. I'll promote that. But if you like this podcast, I'm sure you'll love that. And
totally.
So, Danette, did you have anything for audiences to keep in mind as they listen to this conversation with Ann?
So I love that Anne talks about the fact that some problems are unsolvable, and that doesn't mean we give up, that we look for others who might want to work with us and bring a small group of interested people together and start chipping away at some of those unsolvable problems. I also really liked things that people do to make problem solving worse. And she talked about threads, so I'm just going to sort of highlight those three as we go into the conversation. So people love to complicate things. That's an issue when you're problem solving. Don't make it any more complicated than you need to. I also love where people have already, we're going into, say, problem solving or collaboration, and someone's already come up with the idea that they know the answer. So it's really a tick and flick. And again, what a waste of people's time and energy. So don't do that if that's what you think you need to do. And sometimes there won't be a solution. So you just really got to get to that. Let's work together. The other thing I love, and Anne did talk about this on our last podcast as well, is the Rolling Stones example. She just is so good at telling that story.
Just for me, there's one quote that's going to come up, and I took a lot from it. I like this one because it speaks, I think, to a lot of the mindset, a lot of the decisions that are sort of talking about this. But it's just the quote that Anne says, which is, the more senior we are, the more we are required to have an answer. And I think that is a big problem more broadly, that people feel like they have to have an answer, and so anyway, that's something to keep an eye out for and an ear out for our listeners.
Actually, Giz, you've just reminded me. The other thing is Anne's definition of collaboration. We'll talk about that when we come back, but I really like people to notice the difference between what she talks about collaboration and teamwork.
All right, well, without further ado, Danette, let's jump to your conversation between you and Ann Braithwaite.
Hello and welcome to the Adapt with Danette FM podcast. My name is Danette Fenton-Menzies, and today I am so blessed to have a wonderful guest, Ann Braithwaite, who's going to be joining me and talking about all things to do with collaboration and problem solving. So I'm super excited. And if you follow Magical Learning, you would also notice that we also had a recent podcast with Anne on it as well. So super excited for this conversation. And Anne, welcome. Let's start by getting you to introduce yourself to our viewers and our listeners.
Hi, Danette. It's so lovely to see you. And as you can see, it's a gorgeous, gorgeous day here in Nelson. Just outside of. I live in Hope, which I love being able to say.
Love the name.
It's the name of where I live, and my street is Clover Road. So it can't get too much better than that on a day like today. And I get to live in this gorgeous part of the world. So how did I end up where I am? Long story short, I did my first move as a 1 month old when I left from New Zealand to Australia, and I've been sort of hopping around ever since, really. I love living and experiencing different things, and my career has also been a potpourri. My first career was as an air traffic controller. After that, I went into joining consulting world through a various couple of steps. I've worked as the senior manager in very large organisations, for example, head of leadership development for British Telecom in the UK, head of Wellcome Trust in the UK, and last 10 years I've worked independently as a consultant in my own practice for 12 years now, I think, maybe even 13 coming up. So and what's it all about? I just love gnarly problems. I love helping people solve them. So it's quite appropriate, I think, for today's topic.
Yeah, super excited. So let's get into the questions. And my first question is, what have you seen or experienced that helps you with collaboration and or problem solving? And today I think we're looking at both, so collaboration and problem solving.
Yeah, what I've seen and experienced is that there's no problem too big or problem too hard, that if you get the right set of heads around a table in a room, walking on a beach, that you can't actually make some progress on it. Some of the problems in our world are actually unsolvable, and I think that's something we might want to talk about later in the podcast.
Love that.
But many, many problems are solvable, and generally we find that the thing that's mostly in the way is us. And that's been my experience over the years: large-scale transformation, individual working and executive coaching, and particularly focus in, working for collective intelligence, for all of us to bring our genius to a problem. My experience has been, no matter how hard it is, you can get some progress done when you put the right spirit, the right people, and the right shape around a problem. They can make progress.
I love that. So let's start at where we don't want to end up, which is sharing an example of whether it's poor collaboration and or problem solving. And particularly I'm interested, like we don't have to name the organisation, but I'm interested in the impacts when it didn't go well.
Well, one it pops to mind very easily, and I think it's a very good example of problems that many can relate to, and it's called putting it in the complicator. And if anyone out there follows my little blog posts, they're called snippets, you will have read one called Avoid the Complicator. And we love to overcomplicate problems. We love to do that. We like lots of reporting and plans and multiple reporting so senior people can know what's going on. And we give ourselves a great deal of confidence by putting all these artifacts around things, and we make approvals processes and so forth. And a lot of it is we almost over-engineer what we've got to do. So that's the first thing I would say about poor problem solving and poor collaboration. We put in the complicator, and we can talk about the complicator if we want to.
Yes.
The second one is we know what the answer is before we've started. Now, you may or may not have experienced this in your world, wherever you are listening to this podcast, but sometimes we get a senior executive who's made a promise somewhere. Sometimes they look like a minister. Sometimes they look like a CEO. Maybe they're a team leader or a person with a particular project. And they made a promise somewhere that something's going to happen and it's going to look like this. And this becomes the answer, even though this is not the answer and something else is the answer, not this. And you spend an awful lot of time and energy either maneuvering that person off the this and onto the that, or making the that look like the this, even though it isn't. So I find that's number two.
Yes.
We've already got an answer to a problem, and it's not really the answer, but somebody decided it was. The third one I think we do is I think where I went before, which is we try to solve a problem that actually hasn't got a solution to it. And we are very uncomfortable living with the uncertainty that comes with that.
Yep.
I think this is the biggest skill gap we've got in leadership, in our talent pools, and just generally in the paradigm within which we operate today in organisations. Those traditional approaches have taught us to solve problems. They haven't taught us, skilled us, equipped us with the mindsets and thinking that we need to live with unsolvable problems, but still make progress within them towards some sort of aim or goal that we want to make. We try to tame them. And there's all kind of books out there: Tame Wicked Problems, The Other Side of Complexity. There's book titles a mess. I say embrace the marvelous mess, because inside the marvelous mess is opportunity. But it's uncomfortable. We're not used to it. And we're taught to have an answer. And the more senior we are, the more we're required to have an answer. So the two things are really intention. So those will be my three things around problem solving. Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit more about the complication that we inherently want to go in and make it more complicated. What are we looking for if people are heading down that particular route? What are the signposts that maybe we need to step back and not make it so complicated?
I think you'll notice that the more people ask for reports, the more they want to plan, the more they need to be informed. It's a lot of that is beyond style, right? So some of us prefer the written means to the verbal means and so forth. So I'm moving beyond that.
Yes.
If the equivalent is your verbal, they want more meetings and more discussions, or they want more reports and so forth. Over engineering that layers and layers of project management over small initiatives, trying to break down complex problems into all the constituent parts and managing every single part of it. Now we do that. There are projects and elements of projects that work very well for that. Some basic IT development, no matter how complicated it is, works well for that. Building a rocket ship, a spacecraft, works really well. It's hell of a complicated, but it's very ordered. And that's a really good place to do that. What doesn't work like that? Employee engagement. Let's solve employee engagement. Now, if you had a project plan that could do that, you'd be a multi-trillionaire by now. Right? It doesn't
So true.
break down in constituent parts. And if you do that and you do that and you do the other thing, we'll fix it. It's not something that's ever fixed. It's like good health. You want a healthy self. You don't get to a set weight. You don't get to a set level of fitness. You don't get to a set nutritional balance and then go, okay, I'm done. I can stop now. I've achieved healthy on this date for that cost involving these many resources. It doesn't have an endpoint. It's not a project. It's something you have to live with all the time, and it's always changing and morphing around. And I think we try and solve those problems. And that's where I see that going wrong. So.
Yep. Oh, I love that. And for leaders who are listening in and thinking, yeah, there is some stuff that we can't really solve, but I'm a bit uncomfortable with discomfort. What would you suggest for them to learn to sit in that space of discomfort?
Well, I want to reassure everybody that you're really good at this. We just don't do it at work. So if anyone out there is a parent with small children and they've run a children's birthday party, they know how to do uncertainty really well. Right? You got this. You got this. You got teenagers going off of an evening doing something and you're not entirely sure where they are. You got this, right? So humans are actually really great with uncertainty. We just don't really like it that much. So what do? We try to give ourselves some certainty. So find the things that you can give yourself some comfort with and just take as big a risk in that uncertainty as you can, and then just take it a smidge further, just a little bit further than you feel comfortable with, and just control those things that you can. Set some boundaries around where you're ready to go and where you're not. And the other thing is have people with you. So this brings in the collaboration. Most of these problems do not belong to any one person on their own. Employee engagement does not, for example, if we use that idea, it's not any one person's job. It's everybody's job, including the employee, all the way through. So let's think about how we gather that collective wisdom, that collective energy, the resources and the knowledge. Collectively, we can deal with that uncertainty. Collectively, we can solve these problems really well. But it is a matter of also getting used to it, because we are so indoctrinated to have the answers. Just practicing saying, I don't know yet. Right? I don't know yet. Doesn't mean you never going to know, but right now, I don't know yet.
Yeah.
We're thinking about that. These are some things we're going to try. We're going to try several things and see which one works the best. And then when we find ones that work really well, we'll push on those, we'll stabilize them, we'll get them moving. If things don't work, we'll just shut them down quickly. We'll move on. And so getting feedback from the system, whatever that is super important, and doing that in a way that's really dynamic and doesn't wait till 3 years into the project. Did it work? No. Right? Right early. Bring that collaborative thinking in really early, getting the dynamic controls. I talk to people a lot about this. There's some really foundational work done by Harvard a number of years ago of controls in an organization. And we're really good at the ones called KPIs, performance reviews, goals, vision, mission, bloop, 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 bloop. We're really rubbish at the ones called dynamic interactions. And whenever I teach this model to people, they go, "But what do we do there, Anne?" And I go, "What do you reckon you could do?" And what we reckon we can do don't seem very managementy and leadery. They just have a chat to people. What are they telling you? Set up some forums where people can actually come and work with you on a problem, workshop it with you, genuinely in collaboration with you. Not another engagement survey, because I can tell you now, just about any organisation I walk into, I say, "What's your engagement score?" They can probably tell you what they need to fix, because they're that blunt of an instrument.
Yes.
And then the comments at the end get disregarded as anecdotal, qualitative, either grumpy people or Pollyannas, right? So we negate those out. So there's other ways of getting to that information in a way that, you want to do it. And then look inside you as a leader. What are you uncomfortable with? Why are you avoiding the uncertainty? What in your world is making that hard for you? And it is hard, because our DNA of organisations say this is not okay. You should have the answer. That leadership model needs to be tipped on its head. You're there to create an environment within which all of the collective brilliance of the people around you gets to be at its absolute best. I guarantee you, from 30 years of working in change, the people in front of you and around you have got the answers, and collectively are way smarter than you're ever going to be. So let's get them on the problem.
Love that. And from our previous discussion on the Magical Learning podcast, I realized you have a beautiful definition of collaboration. So let's bring this into the conversation. When would we use collaboration, and when wouldn't we use collaboration?
Right, so we use collaboration. It gets interchanged with teamwork a lot. So I'm not sure how your other guests have talked about collaboration, but here's how I talk about collaboration. Collaboration for me is used when it requires innovation. It's a problem we don't already have a good or best practice for. We don't know how to do it. We've got to invent our way through it. We've got to create a future, create something that didn't exist before. Whereas teamwork is, we know what our role is, we know what we've got to do, we get to execute on it really well. And that side of the problem is more about coordination, communication, control, and cooperation. Now, cooperation spans the two, clearly, but it's more on that side of cooperative nature that's happening. So it's the C word. There's a whole lot of them. There's 5 of them in there. And collaboration for me is the one where it's a problem we all care about, nobody owns, and no one can fix it on their own. Now, if it's looking like that, my suggestion is take a collaborative approach to it, because you're going to invent a way through it.
I love that. Oh, so that goes beautifully into the next question, which is, based on your experience, what tips do you have for others? And Jez added this next bit, including young people who might just be starting out, around how do they go about developing both their problem solving and their collaboration skills?
Practice it. Just live yourself, live your natural human way of being. So find opportunities to do that. So you might, if you're not yet in the workplace, or you've got other activities outside of work, find something that you really care about. And you can't do it on your own, and no one else is doing it. Find some people who care about what you care about, and see what you can't do together. See if you've got some resources. You've got to find people who are willing and able to do something. So willing's good, but if you can't actually do something, it only gets you so far. The thing they might do is connect you to somebody else. That's enough, right? So find people who are willing and able, but they care about what you care about, and they're willing to take a try on it. In an organisation, find something that you really, really care about. It might not sit on your desk. It might not be in your job description. It might not be your accountability. Maybe it's nobody's accountability. Well, if the floor needs sweeping, pick up the broom and start sweeping, and see who's going to join you in that, right? Find some allies. I also say, when you're starting out, keep the group tight. Now, this is slightly counterintuitive, because collaboration can be confused with another C word, consensus. And it's every man and his dog gets to have a say and comes on in, and you know what happens. We have a great big talk fest and nothing happens. So when you're starting, start small. Start small on something, get some runs on the board, find out how you work well together, find out if you really deeply connect on the things that matter to you the most. And when you get that connection right, then you can get aligned on doing something, and only then get started on doing something. So how I summarize that is connect first, find your common ground, align on the matters that matter and the ones that matter the most, and then have some experiments, try some stuff, see what works, and do that together.
Love that. Oh, that's a beautiful answer. So now I'm really interested in, what's your favorite example of problem solving and or collaboration? Might be one or the other. And I'm really curious about why it's your favorite example.
Well, Danette, you've heard me talk about the Rolling Stones before.
Yes, I love this one.
It's the story I tell because it's not anyone's organization, and it's but so I'm going to give you two. I'll give you the quick version of the Rolling Stones, and then we'll talk about maybe an example from the business world, just because we're not all rock stars, right? And that can be, yeah, well, that's great, Ann, but I don't play the guitar. So collaboration, I like to explain that once upon a time in a Dartford station in a cold and drizzly London, and if you've ever been to Dartford, you'll know it's no way near rock and roll. Mick Jagger was standing on a platform with a copy of a Muddy Walters LP, the old vinyl, in his hand, and a young guy called Keith Richards spotted this other lanky guy holding this record and went and said hello because he shared an interest in that music. They then started hanging out at clubs like the Marquee Club, where they found other people like Bill Wyman and Charlie Watts. And they all got really passionate about not just the music, but they wanted to actually create music, and they wanted to make their own sound, and they wanted it to be kind of this way. So they found, and then they got jamming. And that's what I call the collaboration act of collaborating. They got testing things out, trying new riffs, seeing what would work, seeing how they like to play together, what could they do, what could they shape, what they pull around. 1965, they released a track that you might know called Satisfaction. It has lasted for 5 decades, half a century.
Yeah.
It has transitioned the digital age of music. It's been streamed over 600 million times on online platforms. Now, when Mick Jagger and Keith Richards met on a platform in Dartford, they didn't sit down and write a project plan where that was the key outcome in their vision and they would book Wembley, etc., etc., etc. No, they just hung out about something they cared about and got on with doing something about it. That's great collaboration.
Love that
They rehearsed, and then they became an awesome team. When they're on stage at Wembley, that look with the guitar could mean stop, could mean go again, because the crowd's with us. But only they know, because they've rehearsed it and they got that teamwork going really, really well. They're not inventing new riffs at Wembley. That's done way down the track previous. So great collaboration. So let's take that to an organizational example. So you've got 3 leaders in 3 different organizations who all have a role to play in a cross-sector issue for their country. Again, these 3 are not the entire sector, but they're 3 who go, I'm really restless with the status quo. I know I want to do something about it. The way we're working across these sector isn't working. It's all additive. We need it to be exponential. We need it to be generative, or we're never going to get out of this hole. I wonder who else might see it like I do. Go find a couple of friends. Turns out 2 or 3, usually minimum of 3 to 5 works really well. 3 others find out we're also a bit restless about that. Then you empty your pockets. What have you got? What have you got? I've got some of this. I've got some of that. And before you know it, you've got just enough out of that budget and a couple of people over there who are a bit underutilized, and you've got a platform you could share. And you start working together. Now, a particular project I'm thinking about had, across the sector, been spinning its wheels and burning a lot of money for about 3 years.
Oh, ouch.
We got them together in the space of 8 months, 4 of which was spent just getting connected and aligned. Half the time was spent on getting connected and aligned. And I want to really hit on that point before we did anything. I was just at this client last week, in fact, on a different project, and someone mentioned, you know, that other project, when we actually got to doing stuff, we did it in a month.
Wow.
And they built what they needed to build in a month.
That's awesome, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Now, it was a big month with a lot of people,
I
but it
bet.
was done.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that many people relative to what they did. So that just tells me what is possible. And people say to me, can you measure it? And I'm busy capturing all this information I can for my clients, which shows how half the time really is spent on the connection and the alignment before we actually go into action. Now, typically what happens is we do it completely the other way around. We get started doing something, we figure out it's not working and we're not aligned, and then we find out that actually we've got the wrong people on the job in the first case, and that person actually has got this whole other agenda and isn't really interested. So we go through that swing, and there's a whole lot of stuff around this. So Tuckman's model of storming, norming, forming, and performing, the interrupted model of that, Gerswick's work, will tell you that we spend half the allocated time, whether that's an hour, a day, a week, a year, we will spend half of it doing the storming and norming. Does that sort of sound like connecting and aligning? Maybe. No surprise that it takes about half that time. Tyson Yunkaporta's work on Sand Talk, etc., alludes to this without talking about it directly, talking about the need to connect and understand your country, understand your context, know what's important to you, share your knowledge with others before you go off doing anything in particular. Same here with Te Ao Māori. I recently got to hang out with some lovely folk from Northland up at the Disaster Emergency Management Conference in the Gold Coast a couple of weeks ago. And really, we were sitting in korero, which means to talk, and wānanga, which is kind of more of an ideas generative conversation. And they were so excited to hear someone like me stand up and say, spend most of your time in this space and everything else is easier. Everything else will follow. At some point in these difficult projects and problems, the wheels will fall off. Make no mistake, something will hit you. Someone will get pulled off. A new priority will arrive. The election will happen. Something will happen. Your organisation will be sold. There's a merger. A whole piece gets divested. Something will happen. The wheels will fall off. And that connection and alignment is what will keep you going. It's what reattaches the wheels, puts the car back together, and you go along together. And that's my lived experience as well.
What great examples. I always love your Rolling Stone story. And I really love that example too. And totally agree about that whole connection side of things first. I've seen many, many projects where they've gone straight to solve and it's the wrong thing they're solving. So, yeah.
Especially when one of the people in the room already has the answer
Yes.
that they told someone else was the answer.
Yeah, totally
Just to
true.
double click on that.
My next thing is there anything else you'd like to share, including any helpful resources for our listeners and our viewers?
Yeah, sure. So I have available, which I'll organise with you and in the podcast, we can give a little freebie quick start guide for collaboration. So the
Nice.
things that you would need to think about. So it's the exact same process I use with my clients. It's a series of questions for you to work through, just to help you start thinking about what it is. And the first one is, what do you dare to dream about? What do you dare to dream that could be possible? And then it'll work you through a way to just have a think about who you might find and how you might lean into that project, just the starting steps of thinking. So resources for that are there on my website, and you can just sign up there. I'm not sure of the links. Other people sort that out for me, but it's there.
Yes,
we'll sort
we
that
will.
out.
It'll be in the
I can't
podcast
say it's there in
descriptions.
the corner. I haven't got
Yes.
that clever yet. It's there in the corner. So I would do that. And then I think what I would say to people is read widely where you are interested. So often we get inspired by all sorts of interesting and curious things, and there are examples of collaboration and problem solving from everything from ancient history, which is something I like to listen to on podcasts, to gardening to music to sport to all over the place. So don't just limit yourself to reading in the business world. Read in the everyday world. Read in areas of interest that seem parallel or even completely tangential to what you're doing in your life. And I think you will find great and interesting things there. There is so much content online where you can go and find awesome things. So that's what I would say, rather than point you to a particular thing or model, because we all resonate with different things. I just say, follow your curiosity and just take the moment to wonder what you think about what you're reading. So rather than just take it all in as gospel, go, do I agree with that? Yes, and? Or no, because? Yes, but I would do something else. I just encourage everyone to do that and find those interesting learning places, because they are literally magical. And you will find in there gold and stardust for you that's really close to how you think and operate and learn. And I would go hard for those. They may be very untypical places, not in the management books, but don't disregard them, would be my advice.
Love that, Anne. So we're just about at the end now. So I'm sure you are going to have people who want to reach out to you. So let's give them your website and any other places that they could reach out to you.
Sure. So I keep it pretty minimal on the socials. Again, that's something I do to keep my energy going, and I encourage others to do that and monitor what works for you. So 2 places, you can find me on LinkedIn, just my full name at LinkedIn, and same for my website, which is annbraithwaite.com. Reach out there, get in touch. I do a newsletter. I say it's monthly, but it's a little sporadic. And I share my snippets, and I share things online as well. Snippets are a homage to an old pal of mine who would, on one of those 3-country gnarly transformations, one of those ones, she'd come up to me, she'd go, and she was Australian, so I do my best Australian. She'd go, AB, I've got a little snippet for you. And I go, Now, a little snippet was always very useful intel. It was always a little something I needed to know about what was going on. Now, make no mistake, it wasn't gossip. It was things are shifting in the world. That's happening, this thing. Triangulation says, maybe need to think about it differently. So that's why in respect of those little moments of snippets, I share my little snippets with you to have a think about, and I write them in a fairly light way. So they're based in real life, most of them. So enjoy those as well.
I love that. Well, Anne, thank you so much for joining us on the Adapt with Danette FM podcast. And I'm looking forward to future seasons where we talk about things like experimenting and stuff like that as well, because I'd definitely love to have you back. So can I say thank you so much? And to all our listeners and viewers, stay adaptable.
Always great to hear from Anne. A great conversation there, Danette. Danette, did you have any key takeaways that you had from that conversation?
I really love the insight around we're actually pretty good at dealing with uncertainty. We just sort of need to get a bit better at putting that as part of what we do. And as a leader, being okay saying, well, I don't actually have the answer to this yet, and working with others to sort of move towards what is the answer. And I really loved her definition of collaboration, which I sort of preempted at the beginning, where she talks about it's problems where we don't already have the good or the best practice for, we don't know how to do it. So we've got to invent our way through that particular problem. So it's something that hasn't existed before. So we're working with others to be able to create what that might look like, versus teamwork where we've sort of got a structure, we've done it before. So I really like those insights as well. What about you, Jez?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of really interesting things. I thought that this idea around employee engagement is often caused by denial by leadership, so
Yes.
like that engagement is related to how people are being treated,
Yes.
less the tasks,
Yes.
which is interesting. And I also thought that this idea around employee engagement is like health, where it's like an ongoing thing. I think people think of it as a sort of something you just do once in a while and then just keep it rolling. But it is an ongoing thing, and it's not just one person's job either. It's everybody's job. Yes. So I thought that was really good. But yeah, no, a lot of great ideas there from Anne.
The other thing I really liked is she spent that time talking about we need to invest at the start rather than getting into let's solve it. It's around actually aligning with one another, getting to know each other. And that on the ones that they've got really good outcome, a lot of that first bit is really about that rather than making the plans and getting into the solving. And because one of the things she says is things are going to change as we start to fix them. So to be able to have those good relationships and be on the same page makes it easier to adapt as well and collaborate and problem solve together. So many words of wisdom from Anne. She's fabulous as a guest. Thank you, Anne.
Yes, thanks, Anne. Yeah, it's so interesting. Just before we get to our mailbag segment, I just think it's so interesting that so many of these lessons that we take away from people come down to how much work you have to do beforehand. It's almost like you're building your business in a lot of these conversations to just survive impacts from fate. Yep. And it's all about how can we be really secure with each other and really strong together so that what happens, it's not going to rip us apart and people aren't going to fall off. So it's interesting. Yeah. But I mean, so interesting, all these conversations, how there's certain through lines that you can start pulling out, which I really like. Okay. Well, Danette, I did mention it before, but I think it's time to go to our Ask and Adapt segment, our mailbag segment. So here we go. Now, this is Ask and Adapt. This is a segment where people can write in their listener questions, and Danette, you can help them adapt. This is people who might be experiencing a change in life, might want to experience a change in life, or just may have a question for you. We answer all of them. Not all of them. We answer selected ones, but we do review all of them, and we will see them. And if you want to send them in, you can do that in a couple of ways. Spotify, you can leave a comment. YouTube, you can leave a comment, or you can email us at adaptwithdanette@gmail.com. So today's email comes from Sriraj, and he says, "Hey Danette, what was the point with your old work that led you to starting Magical Learning? I'm currently an employee, but I think I might want to run a business one day. Many thanks, Sriraj."
Sriraj, what a great question. And mine was second marriage, 5 young kids, oldest was 12, and I was looking at my career and going, I don't think there's an employer that's going to work around 5 sick kids. And I really liked the idea. So from when I was probably 4, I knew I wanted to run a business. And so I thought, you know what? Perfect opportunity to do this. Now, of course, a rational brain would go, you've got 5 mouths to feed and you've got no certainty because you never run a business before. And for me, that was the reason why I did it. I was like, this cannot fail because there are these 5 little mouths that need to be fed, need to be educated, etc. And I think the other thing is I love to learn and grow. And so for me, creating a business, so one of the things I would say is think about if you do want to run a business, find something that you would do for free, because some days you probably will end up doing it for free. And if you don't really enjoy it, when it gets hard, you're going to struggle. Whereas I don't think I really have ever struggled because I love to learn. And every day I learn something new. And I know that that helps other people. So it also has a bigger picture for me. I'd also go and have some conversations with some people who've maybe already set up business. Is it the right time for you in your life? What do you like with risk? How good are you with sales? And for me, sales are really about building relationships. And not everyone sees it that way. So it's sort of learning where are your strengths and who can you work with perhaps to make sure that you don't have any big gaps in that business as well. And I'd say ultimately, we often regret what we don't try. So it's probably worth giving it a go and, managing your risks and seeing it as a really great learning opportunity. So, Sriraj, I reckon that's a great question. Jez, have you got any, because you've got a few side gigs, have you got any suggestions? It could be a side gig.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. I mean, I'm someone who does a lot of freelance work. So, I've done freelance acting, freelance hosting, freelance voiceover. So, freelance video podcast production. quizzes, trivia, team building. I've done a lot of freelance work. And so I will say that there is a way that you can probably trial this at 2 to 3 hours a week. Once you've set everything up, like, your logo and what have you, you can probably give this a little go and just see if you A, like it, B, if it seems viable or anything, because side hustles are such a common thing nowadays. There's probably a lot of people you can talk to about how to properly establish this. Mine is more based, it's a more sole trader type deal because it's typically me behind a mic or in front of a camera. But for people that do want to build out a bigger business, I think, there's a lot of people that start out just one person shops and then end up expanding them out. So, I highly recommend doing that. But I would also say stay tuned for next week's episode with Kanika because she talks about how she built her own creative platform and then managed to get staff as well. So there's a sort of, a more modern example as well. But yeah, no, Danette, I agree with everything you said. I think there's everything that you said is exactly right as well. You need to have that motivation and what have you. So yeah, thank you for that.
Nice.
Well, Danette, did you have any final things you wanted to leave our audience with regarding Ann's chat, regarding what we've chatted about here today, or anything else?
I will leave everyone, so our listeners and viewers, with her sort of key insight at the end, which is about continuing to learn, and it can be things like read. So she said, don't just read business books, based on what you're interested in. You could read history, gardening books, etc., because what that will build is your unique perspective. And so when we're collaborating and problem solving, you're bringing a different lens than the person next to you who may not be interested in business or gardening or whatever it is. So continue to go down the things that you really enjoy and don't just go, well, I'm just going to focus on the business world. Expand to what you're interested in because there are extraordinary connections. And it reminds me of a podcast we did recently where we asked the question around how are art and business similar. So I think being able to do that brings your unique perspective to the table, and the more we can work with other minds that are different to ours, the better, because that creates great problem solving, great collaboration. What about you, Jez? Any final takeaways?
Not really. I just wanted to say that for people that didn't know, this podcast is actually a companion podcast to the amazing book, The Adaptable Leader by Danette Fenton-Menzies. So I'd highly recommend people check that out. It has an accepts model, which is sort of each one of those is a different item. And this is just problem solving and collaboration, which are just two of those letters. So I highly recommend people check out the whole book for a lot more ways to adapt. If you're feeling like you're struggling with technology or the change of pace or everything, this is the toolkit that will really help you out.
I love it.
Awesome. Well, Danette, did you want to leave our audience with anything?
Yeah, so can I say thank you to everyone who's been listening and watching and sharing. We super appreciate you doing that. And as always, stay adaptable.